Great. Thank you so much, Nancy. And I'd like to say thanks to U of I Extension for hosting these really great webinars. If those of you who have not attended one of these webinars in the past, the U of I Extension webpage has archived many really excellent webinars, and so thanks to them. There's also a nice collaboration between U of I Extension and rural partners on these webinars, which have a specifically rural focus. So let me speak just a minute about rural partners. Many of you know about this group. It's a member-driven public-private partnership that brings together state agencies, universities, private sector entities to talk about and help shape rural development policy. And so I welcome you to visit the Rural Partners website. And also say that Rural Partners is working with the Illinois Institute for Rural Affairs, which I currently direct, and the Governor's Rural Affairs Council to host the annual Rural Development Conference that will be taking place February 22nd and 23rd in Springfield, Illinois. So without further ado, I'd like to turn over to Sean Park, my colleague. He's currently a program manager in the Illinois Institute for Rural Affairs at Western Illinois University. He brings to WIU, the Institute, and to rural communities, lots of experience in the private sector. For 10 years, he owned and managed a rural grocery store in Rushville. He had 7 years working as a manager in one of the national pharmacy companies. And then he worked 6 years in our Small Business Development Center. So he brings to rural community and economic development outreach this experience as an entrepreneur, understanding rural food landscapes, as it were, as well as doing the difficult work of community engagement. So without further ado, let me introduce Sean Park, who will be talking about regional food as a basis for economic development. Sean.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so I'm here today to talk a little bit about a new program that we're going to launch the first of the year through the IIRA. And it's based out of the Value Added Sustainable Development Center. It's a lot of acronyms. We're all used to dealing with a lot of those. This program is called the Regional Food Economic Development Project, or Project ReFED. And what it's going to do, I hope, is build on the work that we've already had accomplished through some of the rural food desert communities that we've worked in. But take that into a whole local food system approach. So it's based on economic and community development, but it has a food system point of focus. And part of, let's see here, I'm having a little bit of trouble advancing my slides. There we go. Okay, so yeah, part of it is, hate to dwell on the negative, so I see it as some opportunity out there. What we'd like to do is focus on some of that value added, but also increase production, distribution, and demand on the other side of it too. When moving an economic sector, you can't prop up one specific point. And that's kind of where this project comes from. Looking at the landscape, there were grants that would support new farmers, that would support food hubs, and that would support food co-ops. But none of those grants worked across the board. You know, it wasn't just what can we do to improve the system itself. And so we applied for several different grants, and we're able to receive a fair amount of funding this year that's going to keep us rolling for at least the next 3 years. So that I'm actually able to hire as many as 3 people, which will be great. But those folks will specialize in areas that maybe I don't have personally a lot of experience in, especially at the beginning farmer part of it. Now, we'll be providing business assistance through each section of that economic sector, very much in the way the Small Business Development Center does, but a very focused attack, so to speak. So one of the things, and like I said, bear in mind, it's an opportunity. It sounds kind of tough, but This is a look at average farm income. This was developed by University of Illinois. And the graph shows some of the lows and highs, but it's important to look at some of the ones that, it got down to as low as $11,000 in 1998. And when we have that peak there in the middle, as high as 2007, all the way up to, say, 2013, that was really a big push for ethanol. So that produced a lot of energy for the country, but that's not a lot of food, right? What we're looking to do is try to feed our neighbors, and farmers have taken pride in that, rightly so, for hundreds of years. But it's really tough to be a farmer. If you look at some of these, first of all, fluctuation up and down and up and down, but also sometimes it crashes. You have very little control over that. At the same time, ADM has shown profits from 2012. This would be a 12-month total, but going from 1.2 billion to this last quarter going to 4.1 billion in net income. So that's a huge profit, and a lot of that's coming out of the value added there. That's what they do. But if you talk to a farmer, they're not getting any richer. It's not translating back to the community farm. And what we'd like to do is see if there's a way to add value to what they're producing, or produce other items that might add value to their farm enterprise. So here's some of the parts that I think really highlight what the opportunity is. Looking at economic development, these figures come from the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, and this is 2013 when they did this. We're looking at estimated 96% of annual food expenditures, or 14 billion. Of that, 14 billion of which consists of fruits and vegetables, and that's all spent on imported food. And what we mean by that is anything outside the state. A significant portion of this demand could be produced in the state and the region, yielding an estimated 2.5 billion in economic activity in the region, or 10 billion in our state. So, and because that money is spent locally, we have the money multiplier effect. And depending on what figure you use, could be as low as 1.4, as high as 2.6 times that's multiplied. But now you're looking at $14 to $29 billion in economic activity. And I'm not foolish enough to think that we're going to get, bananas produced here, things like that. But what if we could just capture 10% of that? That's a huge boost. Not to mention the jobs, much of that is in the rural economy where we need that kind of help, and could be sold in urban food deserts, which is a process that a lot of us are already working on with not a lot of funding to do it. So we're leaving a lot there on the table. So our new project, ReFED, some of the areas that we're going to work on include the business planning for rural food co-ops and independent grocers. So I've worked a little bit with independents. Again, I did that for a decade, so I know how hard it is. And with rural food co-ops, some of you might be familiar with the work we've done there. Another term for those, by the way, is community-owned businesses. And I think that's really important to look at too, that it's run by the community. Rural co-ops are a little different than larger urban co-ops or suburban co-ops a lot of times. And it's really about food access in those areas. So we plan to do the business planning, financial projections, all the stuff that we've been doing fairly successfully there. But we'd like to add business planning, financial guidance for beginning farmers. So we'll be looking to hire somebody there, logistical coordination and networking for local food aggregators. I would love to get some of the university resources involved with that, supply chain management, to look at areas that we can be more efficient. Feasibility studies for local food processors. There's several great groups, not all of them producer cooperatives, but also meat processing, things like that. That again, I consider community-owned businesses because they're multi-owner and they all live in the same area. And we're hoping to do feasibility studies for them. And then finally, some economic development research and data. I haven't had the ability to do a lot of that, but we are starting to pursue research grants, including one from the Illinois Innovation Network that we've applied for that would look at organic fertilizer from some of the Asian carp that's out there, and how we can actually use that invasive species to grow healthy food. And that type of research may come from our departments here on campus. University of Illinois Springfield, I've had a lot of contact with them. They're great guys there, know a lot. And SIU Medicine, their medical department of population science and policy does a lot of great research as well. So anytime we can partner with somebody, I think that's great. And it's an area that we need more information on. Some of the community-owned grocery stores that I've worked with over the last, now we're going on 5 years, we've opened 4 stores. One of them is not on here in Toulon in Stark County, but some of you may be familiar with these. They've been largely funded from community members. They're owned and operated by community members. The latest one to open was actually in Lynch, Nebraska. And I believe we've actually got one that I helped with in Emerson, Nebraska open as well. And then my latest project, which is down in Cairo, Illinois. If you're familiar with that, they need a lot of help there. These stores become more than just economic development, they're community development. The one in Cairo is aptly named Rise Community Market. We're looking to open that, or at least have a ceremonial opening on Martin Luther King Day. And so it's taken us a little bit longer down there. It's been more like 18 months instead of 12 months to open it. But it'll be a 5,700 square foot grocery store, complete with everything they need. Right now, the folks there are driving 30 minutes each way to get food, and that's largely out of state. So it's not helping our economy either. John Shadowins and the guys at University Extension in the southern part, Jody Johnson, they did some really good research survey study on what the folks there need, and this is exactly what they're hoping for. So that's the kind of thing that builds that community development, but also the economic base at the same time. The program was based on rural fresh market principles, and it's based a lot on my experience. So that photo is actually one of the few I have of my store that was in Rushville, and I owned that for 10 years. Some of the things that we noticed were really difficult, and as I've traveled around the state, you hear this almost everywhere, but financing costs. So we're reducing some of that by being community supported and community financed, incorporating new and different value-added revenue streams. So we're bringing in processed food, but food that's processed locally. So we're helping a local business there, or we're preparing things in-house, adjusting the product and department sales mix. So shifting towards the fresh food, which coincidentally has a higher profit margin on that. And then energy. I mean, we've all seen the new bills coming out and how much we're paying now, and it's always been a struggle. That store was open in 2005, and I was paying around $3,500 a month back then for it. It's largely due to the outdated equipment that most of our rural grocery stores have now, and I think that's a big part of the closing. So we're hoping to hire a new co-op specialist that will give me a little breathing room, and I can focus a little bit more on the independent grocers and the processors, aggregators. But this program, the rural fresh markets, we're just hoping to grow from here. But we want to add the spaghetti farmers, and we were able to get funding through a local food promotional program grant, which is great because we're going to be able to hire somebody. Right now, we're looking for a person that has a little bit of background in how difficult it is to produce food. That's really a key. You know, when you go out and talk to folks, you know what they're going through. It makes a big difference. And that person will get to work with a great collection of people in the state, which I have a small list here. I know I've left some folks out, and I apologize. But the partners I've already worked with, the Farm Bureau has a great local food program, Stewardship Alliance, all kinds of political policy work to actually allow us to grow. In some places there are regulations against growing your own food even. And they've done a great job in pushing for that right. Illinois Farmers Market Association, they touch a lot of different areas and work with a lot of local producers as well. But it's important to remember that those also bring in economic activity to your downtown. It makes a huge difference for the other businesses around it too, to know that on, say, Friday morning, we're going to be really busy. Experimental Station in Chicago, FoodWorks down south, and that's actually someone that's going to help us train our new person. So that's great. Jennifer Paulson's group down there is a partner with us on that grant, and that's going to help us get training, because FoodWorks, Land Connection, and Angelica Farms, if you're not familiar with them, there's a program out there called Farm Beginnings. And from what I understand, it's about the most respected new farmer training in the country. Well, it just so happens that 3 of the folks that are involved with that are right here in Illinois. So Angelica Farms are in the north, Land Connections in the east, and FoodWorks is south. So the idea is, can we, I don't think we're going to get quite where they're at. They're very, very good at what they do, but can we get closer to that? And then U of I Extension, I mean, they're fantastic to work with. They have people in every single county, which is great when you're a traveling economic developer. Savannah Institute does a lot of agroforestry type of work, which is very sustainable ag. Lieutenant Governor's Office with their programs that they've had, Ag for All programs. Department of Agriculture and their Illinois products. So these are things we'd like to tie in, and then Farm to School. There's a whole group of people out there trying to get better food into our schools. So how do we get these guys to all work together? And I'm hoping that this program, we can kind of touch base with everybody and help each partner do that. And some of the things we don't have in Western Illinois right now, we don't have something called Linked Up, which is Experimental Stations program. And what that does is subsidize the purchase of healthy food if you're on a Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, or SNAP. So it encourages healthy eating. Annie's project was lucky enough to be part of one of these for University of Illinois Extension over in Quincy. A fantastic program. It helps female farmers. The program that I was part of brought in a series of speakers on farm insurance, crop insurance, succession planning. And the group of ladies in the room were everywhere from recently widowed folks who needed help on how do I run the farm now, all the way to young pregnant mothers who are just starting their farm life. So it was a really great group. We haven't had really good farmers market training down here, simply because there's no contact, no place to hold those meetings. But I think we're going to be able to do that, and we're already planning that in the spring. So again, the economic development there is fantastic. And then the Illinois Buy Fresh, Buy Local. We're part of that group, and it promotes our local producers, creates a directory for them so that people can find out who's producing in your area, which is very difficult to keep up. So that's really hard work. Some of the things that we can do for the producers, we're looking to do financial pro forma creation, market plan creation, business planning. All those are very similar to SBDC work, which I think is fantastic and has been very successful kind of quietly. So we'd like to do that in a one-on-one basis with new and existing farmers. And then grant research. We can't write all the grants ourselves, but we can help you find them, and we can go through and give them a read through and provide technical assistance on that. And then cash flow management once you're open, because that's very important. How do we keep things going? An example on the right there is what they call an enterprise sheet. I wasn't familiar with that when I was with the SBDC, but for certain agricultural commodities, these are put together by several different colleges. They'll have a list of them. I first ran into this in Canada with a Quantaline Polytechnic, famous for having Ryan Reynolds as a alumni. So, but these really give us an idea of what the expenses are going to be for that person. This is just a little snippet of it. There's much, much more information in there. And so we hope to pull those together with the cash flow projections we've done for SBDC type work and create a really good startup plan for farmers. working with food aggregators. So that's a little different than our processors. What we're talking about here are food hubs, already a great program that was kind of trialed last year from farm to food banks, Illinois Farmers Market Association, Illinois Farm Bureau, and Feed Illinois all were very involved with that. Really great program. So we hope to build on that kind of thing. But how can we help them with logistics? Again, financial projections, feasibility studies, economic impact studies, grant availability information, grant research assistance, basically anything to grow those businesses. So in a way, what we're talking about here is a little bit of, if you're in the community development circles, economic gardening. That's really what we're doing, and no pun intended, but we're doing that with food businesses. And this could include food banks as well, where the food is given away, because if they're buying fresh stuff, that's providing jobs out there as well. And that's not to mention the farm to school program. That could be a really solid source of sales for that sector. Processors, there's a lot of great things going on, but they're kind of behind the scenes, or they don't always get the best publicity. A lot of money, federal and state, for small meat processors. I'm working with a client on that right now. Local producer cooperatives, and a lot of you folks might be familiar with ReFED over in Logan County. Great group of folks. I believe they have the same type of grant that I have right now. And they're putting together a producers co-op where they both aggregate and hopefully process at one point. And then fish processors, you may be aware of the co-op we put together with Department of Natural Resources for commercial fishing. It's the only one of those in the Midwest. Right now, they're pulling out between 8 and up to 20 million pounds a year of invasive carp, or as it's now known, copy. Right now, it's mostly being used for animal feed, but we're looking at using that as an organic fertilizer and what a commercial level that would look like. That's actually on the very far left is Roy Source, Source Enterprises, Source Freshwater. He's been a great help to food banks, to my guys on the water, just to a lot of folks, and he's working on developing a market for that fish, and he works constantly on it. Techniques that we could employ here. Oh, I almost forgot to mention the SIU Carbondale's fermentation lab, also a great source for producers. So a lot of these things out there, how do we get them to all work together? Technical assistance, again, feasibility studies that can be used for grants or loan applications, marketing assistance, and access to network of producers and aggregators. And then sometimes, that might just be letting somebody know that Illinois Department of Ag already has these outreach programs to sell overseas, things like that. How do we put them in contact with that person? And then finally, the economic impact. I say this sometimes, maybe too often, but those that work in community and economic development, we know that our job is about quality of life. That's really what we're trying to do. That's what makes it so rewarding. But if you're going to get funded, having those numbers are very important. So we're going to look for actual economic indicators here. And the goal of that is to secure permanent state funding for this sector of the economy. How do we grow this? But we've got to show them that there's a lot of value there. So some of those that we're going to pull from Small Business Development Center are the jobs that we've created, jobs that have been retained, production increases. So and not necessarily in pounds of food, but in actual dollars, how much did this revenue increase for this farmer or this processor? And then private investment, how much was invested that wasn't state money into this? There are already great existing programs out there from universities, but we're going to bring a little different angle at it too, because we're going to come at it through economic and community development, being part of the Illinois Institute for Rural Affairs. So we're looking at, economic development agencies, what's out there for them. DCEO is a great partner to work with for us, but also the Economic Development Administration. But we can also look at things like TIF districts, opportunity zones, enterprise zones that maybe aren't being taken advantage of by local food or regional food producers. And then again, working with some of the farm trainers. Farm Bureau is fantastic. And of course, U of I Extension, I think whenever we get to an area, U of I Extension and SBDC should be contacted because they offer such great resources there. And hopefully we can just offer the specific technical assistance. And then eventually I'd love to put together a state economic impact analysis tracking. There have been several attempts at it. The thing about that is, much like a directory, it has to be kept up so you know where you're at. So if we could do that fairly soon at the beginning of 2023, and then at the same time for the next 3 years, we'd have a really good idea if we've moved the needle. And then we have a really good argument for continued funding in this sector. And there's also a safety aspect to it too. Having that local food production, we saw firsthand through the COVID period where we ran into meat shortages. Whether it's a computer virus or an actual virus, we'd rely on 80% of our meat being produced by 4 companies. But what we were seeing was in some of our stores, especially in Winchester, down in Scott County, once they found out that that local meat was produced and sold there and it was still in stock, tons of people came from Jacksonville out to this little community to buy their meat. Well, guess what? They found out it was a better product. And so that butcher shop and that attached co-op are doing really well together. So part of it's just getting them to try the product as well. So a couple of shameless plugs here. Illinois Farm Bureau will be having their local, well, it's local everything now, it just keeps growing. It's a great conference. I think originally it was something like a half a day, and now it's 3 days. Tons and tons of great folks throughout the state that are involved with this will be there. We're going to have a table there. We're actually going to be able to sponsor a producer-buyer networking session and talk about our new program. One of the things I'll be doing there is asking for questions from folks on research into this issue. We currently have a small grant from NIFA to look into some of the local food issues, and it's a planning grant. So we're looking at, okay, if we had the resources, what would we need to go out and find about this? And what do people who are actually, in the trenches doing the work, what would they like to know that would help them? So I'll be asking for questions about that at that conference, and then again at our IIRA Rural Conference, because we're looking at 2 different sides also there, right? We're looking at the local food producers and people that are in that world, but also the small town mayors and regional officials, municipalities. What would they like to know? How would they like to see this, about the economic development in their community? How would that play in? And then finally, because I am lucky enough to be able to hire some help, it's been kind of a one-man show up to this point. Not that I'd have great support at the Institute, but in this department, it's just a one-man show. So I get to hire at least 2, probably 3 people. And these are the 2 positions that we're looking for. A local food specialist, as I mentioned, someone who will train with FoodWorks in Southern Illinois. They'll work one-on-one with producers. That'll include traveling out to the site. That's one thing we do differently. We spend a lot of time on the road, and both these positions will do that. But I think it's much more interesting to get out and talk to people. They'll work with those Illinois local food groups I mentioned, and they'll be able to manage some events and program outreach. So for instance, we'd love to have a bigger presence in Buy Fresh, Buy Local, but it's hard for me to get to all the meetings. So with that, we'll be able to have an extra body to travel around to that kind of thing and put on our own training over here in Western Illinois University. But I'm definitely looking for somebody who has some practical experience producing food. If you've ever worried about how you're going to make the bills while doing this, that's great experience. Now, how do we help somebody else do it and get around the problems you've already found, which is what I've been doing with local grocery. And then finally, we're hiring a co-op development specialist. I'll train that individual, and we have a great group of national folks who can help train as well. They'll work with producer and retail co-ops, similar to what we've been doing so far, but with more capacity. Again, traveling to meet those community groups and work on community-owned businesses. They collaborate with other co-op development centers. So we have a great network, as I mentioned, throughout the nation, but actually in the central corridor, there's a group of us from North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kentucky, Illinois, that all work together on co-op work. Some of us focus on grocery, some of us focus on meat processing, some focus on distribution. So we're all gonna kind of pool our resources this year. And they'll do the business planning. We'll get them training on how to do that. And then community development experience is really preferred. If we've got somebody that's been out there and had to get a group of people that don't necessarily agree with each other, say a group of guys that commercially fish for a living and don't normally spend a lot of time socializing with each other, that's the kind of person that we really are looking for. You know, how do we get these groups to understand it's in their best interest to work together? So that's what I have. That's my contact information. Down the road, we'll be developing some more web presence, some more materials for outreach that will explain this program a little bit more in depth. But you guys, we gave a brief presentation at a UIS event, which was fun to do, but this is actually a really bigger launch for us to let you folks know. So this is kind of our first go around. First of the year, we'll start this program in depth. So that's all I have for you.
Good. Thanks, Sean. And I would certainly welcome any questions, and please put those questions into the chat. We've had several comments through the presentation. Margaret mentioned that the Emerson store was lovely and it's open, and a comment just thanking you for the great work that you're doing. So we can talk specifically about the ReFED program, but maybe even more generally about your rural grocery store work. And you know, one of the questions that sprung to mind for me was the supply chain issue, getting from the farm to maybe a distributor to local grocery stores. What do you envision being, you know, some of the challenges in developing that local and regional supply chain?
Yeah, and again, I work with folks that know a lot more about this than I do, but from what I'm understanding, the local food, a big part of that is refrigeration capacity. At the same time, I'm dealing with some stores that were built, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, maybe longer, and they had expanded to meet that need. And now as rural America shrinks a little bit, they have extra storage capacity. So is there a way to tie the two together? You know, maybe I make a little money storing your stuff for you, helps both of us out, until you can get a much larger group together, and then we could do something like a producers co-op. So I think it's one of those things where you're propping up a circus tent. You can't just do it one pole at a time. Everybody's got to kind of push up at the same time. And so, you know, if you have a whole bunch of growth on the supply side, well, where's that going to be sold, and how's it going to get there? And then if you have a bunch of money for food hubs, where are they going to source, and how are they going to get rid of it? And then again, you can buy local, which is great, but we have to have guys producing. So it's going to be a lot of that networking with folks as well. That's part that you can't really quantify, but I think the synergy will be awesome. So we'll have folks that are learning to produce food, and I'll say, oh, by the way, this guy's actually interested in buying more, which I ran into just last week, a local grocer who said, yeah, I'd love to do that, just not sure where to get it, not sure that the supply is going to be stable. So yeah.
Great. Thank you. Another question in the chat box. A person from the city of Oregon asked, how do local producers deal with food safety regulations? So is there a training? I mean, do we have to sort of expand their knowledge base on these regulations?
Yeah, and again, I know there are folks on the call who know more than I do about this, but both GAP certification and FSMA certification. And from what I understand, so Farm Bureau has done a lot of work trying to get that, but it's a capacity of trainers, is what I understand from the issue. And a lot of these times, if you want to sell to somebody on an industrial level, they need to have you GAP certified or FSMA certified. Once you reach a certain level, I believe, of production, you have to be FSMA certified anyway. There's a cost to that, which is also expensive for the producer. But yeah, so that's the kind of help I'm hoping to kind of give back to our partners. If there's a grant for that and Farm Bureau is interested, could we find a grant to increase the trainers in the community so that we have more and more people who are able to sell? So yeah.
Robbie from USDA mentioned that there's a Rural Energy for America grant that might help manage the supply chain issues. There's a question here about and a point about extension being involved in GAPS training. So you've mentioned extension as being fabulous, and they are.
Yeah, they just need more people.
Exactly. And so then Amy asked, discussing the local meat issue, has any work been done to consider how we increase the local meat packer capacities? Meat seemed to be available, but processing wasn't. And I know that in some parts of rural Illinois, meat lockers have been closing, or the capacity may not be there. So what are your thoughts there?
Well, and some of them have been around for a long time. There's money out there, both state and federal, for that. A colleague of mine down in Kentucky Co-op and Rural Development Center does a great job with that. So I've been hitting him up for, how do you do the feasibility studies? How do I get the information? And he's awesome help. But in terms of that capacity, some of what we saw is when this money comes down, folks who really don't understand farming thought, okay, there's money for this. Maybe I'll get in this business. Farmers, if they don't trust you, don't usually go there. So even though some of that processing was difficult, if they don't think you know what you're doing, they won't go there. So I think producer co-ops really work that way. You have a built-in, supply of cattle coming in, or whatever you're processing, and then it falls on us to kind of help them sell that. Carthage, Illinois has a really great version of that. So they have fresh meat available out front. It's owned by a group of ranchers in the area. So they not only process, but they sell locally. And Western Illinois has actually partnered with them on a few things. So I think that's the kind of thing that we want to keep it increasing. You don't want to build this giant. As economic developers or community developers, we know you can try to bring in that giant industrial factory to help things out, but it hardly ever works out. But if we start small and build these things small, you can do that. So that's kind of how I see that capacity growing for meat production, and really for any type of produce production as well.
Ben Taylor from U of I asked a question about business succession planning. Now, you yourself have gone through a business, you've sold a business, so you understand the challenges of successfully transferring a business, and you're also a business succession planner. Do you think the idea of business succession planning could fit into this? Could there be a younger generation maybe taking over a parent's operation and then adding a local capacity to maybe their corn and soybean, but maybe expanding into local?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if Jeff Hake is on this webinar, but Jeff has done a lot of stuff with the young farmers. And I actually spoke to a gentleman who's on one of the boards for a grocery store that I'm working, and he told me, he said, we've had this farm for, I think he said it'd be 150 years this year. And he said, but when I went to school, I didn't study ag. I learned that from my dad. I studied business. And so he set up a cattle production small business inside that, like you were mentioning, Chris, where you're kind of expanding. It's really hard work to move out of that. And then I think because farming is so tough, a lot of farmers have another full-time job even, so that you can get health insurance, things like that. So now if you want to add animals, well, that's really hard work. Actually, our own Aaron Worley in our office has just gone into that super tough work on top of your other jobs. So, that stuff is really difficult to ask. But yeah, I'm hoping younger farmers seem more willing to maybe carve out a little niche and try it. But we got to show them that it's possible to make a living at it too, right? Those things there have to be examples of, yes, this guy did this, and yes, this did work.
Right. I like the point that I think I appreciate about your work, Sean, is that you talk about sustainable development, and yes, it needs to be environmentally conserving and have a social equity, but it turns out it has to be profitable. So that's always has to be in sustainable development. That has to be part of that.
Yeah, I mean, grants and things are a catalyst for that start, but in the long term, most of these things have to produce their own profit cover their own bills. Otherwise, it's short term and it's at the whim of federal budgeting. So we really want that to be a solid economic sector in Illinois. There are a lot of other states struggling with this as well, but there's so much going on from that very beginning to the very end of selling it, that's why, working with all these great people, we don't really know everything, hardly, not even close. And so, can we bring them in? How do we assist, Farm Bureau? How do we assist Illinois Stewardship Alliance, FoodWorks? These guys are already doing great work. And a lot of times, as Grant said, their staffing capacity, that's the thing, they're doing great work. If they had a little more help, or how could we assist, or so that's a big part of it.
Emmy Brawley asks, what is the best way for potential partners to get connected or stay connected to this work as it unfolds? Emmy says that they run a business development program that helps specialty crop producers scale production by getting them into bigger farms. And the website is workingfarmsfund.org. She says, I see a lot of need for farmer training on business entity formation, labor, and other topics. So I guess the point is, how do we stay connected to what you're doing?
Yeah, I didn't see that, but I definitely would like to talk to her, because that's exactly the kind of thing, and then can we put them in touch with somebody as well? Right now, my information that was there, please shoot me an email. It's hard to juggle all these things, but soon I'll have some help. And then I'm hoping that we can put together a newsletter that will not spam your inbox, but will tell you, okay, here's some of the projects going on, or here's a new program that the state has for small meat producers. Here's this and that, some actual information you could use. And then an intake process for clients. And again, those clients could be anything from a new farmer, existing farmer, food bank, producers co-op, all the way down to an independent grocer. Anything in that food system, basically. If we can do it, we'll help. But usually, again, like I say, there's a lot of folks already out there doing great work, and how do we assist them?
Quianya asks, what is the goal to assist new farmers, especially those in farm beginning? So I guess we talked earlier about succession planning. Presumably, there's already an existing multi-generational farm, already has assets and so forth. So going to the other end of the spectrum in terms of farm size, why might it be important to start about new farmers and small scale development?
Yeah, well, I think it's like a lot of any other small businesses, but when it comes to that beginning farm beginnings, Sherry Doyle is on here with Angelical Organics Learning Center. It's hard for me to get that out. I think some of you, Chris, you might have mentioned that they were featured in a Netflix documentary, maybe, or a lot of good stuff there. They know what they're doing, and that's really, how do we help them with funding? Maybe we can find that for them. I'm hoping we can learn a little bit of that on our end, but we'll treat it like a small business. We don't have the expertise in the actual farming. Hopefully we can get them in touch with other colleges or U of I Extension like Grant, where, they know what they're doing with the local food production. But when it comes to the business part, can we set them up a plan going forward that's based on stuff that Farm Beginnings has already put together, so they have a good idea what to expect and when to expect it? Sometimes that cash flow is a huge issue as well. And how do we help them plan that way? And then we've had a lot of experience with helping people go to the bank. What's that banker going to expect? What's your local economic development situation? If you want a store downtown, maybe there's a TIF district that we can help you set that up with. Other community development types of things through DCO, groups like that. So yeah, that's all that good stuff. Hopefully we'll be involved with this program, but we're going to look at each client individually, just like I look at each town individually, and nothing. It gets really tough because I hear a lot of times, well, how do we scale this? And it is tough, but it's tough because every small business is unique. What you're going to pay in rent has a lot to do with what you already have and who you know, and a lot of stuff like that. I'm sure farming is exactly the same way, right? If I get some land or I already have some land, it's different than if I'm going to rent land. And what I know as a farmer makes a big difference in what my output's going to be. So how do we help them with that? I see somebody mentioned Linked Up is amazing. It really is a great program to help people eat healthier. They're trying to bring that more downstate, and we'd love to be able to help represent them in Western Illinois and sign up grocery stores, things like that for it, because it's going to help the grocery store too.
Julie asks or says, my community and the surrounding area wants to address our lack of access to food. We know one option is to develop a community food store, which can also involve local producers. Do you have the name of a person or agency we can contact? Well, this sounds a lot like you.
Yeah, well, it sounds like where we need to be. Like I say, I know what I'm doing with grocery stores. I know a little bit about what I'm doing going back. I want to be very humble about that because I know some of the folks that are on here and I know how much they know. And putting them on notice, I'm probably going to reach out to you for a lot of information. But yeah, how do you get that started? I mean, one of the things you're looking at is where's the funding come from to buy from local producers? And then how do you explain to them that I can't take 2,000 pounds of tomatoes over 2 weeks? So how, spacing that out, things like that. What does a grocer look for when you go in? If you want to get into his store, what's he going to expect you to talk about when you go get that meeting? But yeah, I would love to. I would say, just like every situation is unique, please email me and I would be glad to talk to you about it and see who we can put you in touch with, what I can do to help in terms of planning. So.
Thanks, Sean. Of course, you can. She can also work through Extension or USDA Rural Development, who are fabulous partners, and eventually get to you. So there's multiple different ways to get to Sean. So
yeah, and vice versa. I'm going to probably reach out to those guys in our area too and say, okay, well, they've got this program here. You can get some help from here. So yeah, working together like that. One thing about economic and community development, I've never run into a situation where there's too many people. It's always, well, if we had just a few more people, we could get this actually done. So why not bring everybody into the tent,
Right. Robbie offers more grant opportunities through USDA Rural Development, including a meat and poultry processing expansion. So obviously USDA has a great, some really great programs that can help a new farm operation or a group of farmers coming together. And you're mentioning a processing cooperative or marketing cooperative. And in some ways, I think that's one of the primary models that you're thinking about is how do farmers work together? How do community residents work together? And you can have operation along the supply chain, I think is one of the ideas that you're looking at, correct?
Yeah, I mean, the goal is, I think, at least in my opinion, is to be able to go into your local grocery store, buy stuff for dinner, and know a few of the farmers that actually sold back there.
Right.
Again, most of our stuff, 96% leaves. If we're importing 96% of our food, that means we're only using 4% there. I think in meat production, it's closer to 6% because we are able to do those small lockers. That infrastructure's there already. But 2% on something like that's huge, right? So in terms of economic impact, how do we go from that 4% to 8%? That would be a huge growth, and that would be slowly building that infrastructure and getting the state to understand that funding is, community and economic development. That's going to increase your tax base. So,
what do you think will be the biggest challenge along that supply chain? I mean, I know starting a small town rural grocery store co-op has its own interesting set of challenges, but presumably helping local farmers or new small scale farmers start is also going to be a challenge. Where do you see some of the challenges are going to be?
Yeah, it varies. So if it's an entrepreneur, that's a little different. There may be a farmer out there who starts to do this and realizes, what if I was an aggregator and a distribution center? And trying to think of Marty's name. He runs a farm over by Fairbury. He actually had a Netflix documentary done on him too. He sells a lot in Chicago, but he's a good farmer, even better businessman, I think, in terms of aggregating than he has the sellers up there. So he has a lot of farmers that sell to him they don't have to worry about where that's going to go, that selling part. So that's one way to do it. The other thing is, and I'm sure Margaret can help me out with this, but when you're doing cooperatives, the personalities all have to mesh somehow, or at least agree. And when you're starting a co-op, no one person signing a letter of guarantee for the bank. And as an entity, you don't have any money starting out. That's a heck of a challenge for a business. So you're looking at who's going to put the money in there. Do they even have the capacity to put the money in there? And then understanding the ownership dynamics as well. That's why we kind of say community owned businesses, because it can be a multi-owner LLC where the profits are distributed more towards who invested the most. So a lot of little things like that. But yeah, in that distribution, that's going to be probably the biggest challenge. Now you just drive your number 2 corn to the grain elevator and they're going to accept it, right? If I grow a couple acres of sweet corn, I'm not sure where I'm going with it. It'd be great if I just knew a co-op that I could go to and they would take that as well. So
sort of thinking about and so you're talking about sort of commodity products, but so on the other end of the spectrum would be sort of niche products. And I'm reminded of Tangled Roots craft brewery restaurant in Illinois, and I think for a while, and they may still be, they're growing their own hops. So I mean, can you imagine other niche products, maybe more hops? Is Illinois going to become famous for craft brewing? But are there other niche crops that maybe you're looking at or you've heard other farmers think about?
We're already like the Department of Ag guys will probably know better than me, but I'm pretty sure we're the biggest packed pumpkin producer in the country. So Thanksgiving, that was all us, right? So those pumpkin pies and horseradish, another one that we're really big on. I think there's a lot of potential for unique crops through that watershed that runs by Havana, goes down the Illinois River. The water that's there, soil's a little sandy, but the opportunity. So they're already doing like carrots and things there commercially, but it's Del Monte renting land and doing it, which again puts us in that same position of, I'm just renting my land, not getting any of that value added dollar in there. And so those are things that we hope to be able to capture and keep in Illinois.
And what response do you get from farmers about becoming part of a sort of a partially constructed supply chain?
I'm sorry, in terms of what
well,
feedback?
I mean, where do you think the strongest support is going to come for constructing this? I mean, do you think there's an untapped demand that people would like to get into farming, but they're just not sure how they would fit into the supply chain? I mean,
I think so. I have personally seen a lot of folks try it, but not understand how hard it is, for one thing. I've seen that in the grocery business too. So how do we give them that assistance so they can still be in business 2 years from now and actually making a living doing it? So I think there's some untapped potential there. I've worked with folks that have moved down from Chicago, have made some money, and thought they'd come back to their small town and maybe do that. And then they realize, boy, this is really hard. I'm selling at the farmer's market, but then the rest of the year it's tough. So if they get into other things like community supported ag, where you're doing a food box, but now I'm kind of into marketing, and that wasn't really what I wanted to do with my retirement. So how do we help get them a place that they can just sell that? They could still do roadside markets, things like that. But also, where's that product going to go? I've spoken to other guys in the state who said, until I got my business in Chicago set up where I was selling to them, there wasn't enough volume to make it make sense downstate, even though they were growing downstate. But maybe if we can put more of an infrastructure there so they know where to sell to, can help.
We're getting near to the end of the session here, but one of the points you made when we were down in Cairo, you mentioned that the residents of Cairo don't have a grocery store, and so they do their food shopping. They very often go to Kentucky or they go to Missouri, which are 30-40 minutes away, and presumably they're spending money on all sorts of other things as well when they're outside of the community. So that obviously that's one of the economic development benefits of having a grocery store locally, is that you're keeping money locally. So that's one thing. But it also got me thinking about, you mentioned destination shopping. I mean, is there a sense that maybe some of the grocery stores, people might go out of their ways to, outside of the community, to come and shop because there's a unique product or a really great deli item?
That's actually, so we've seen that in meat as well. So again, butcher shops, when we look at these small grocery stores, if you have a good butcher shop or a good meat cutter there, that'll bring them in from a long ways away. I know in Ashland, Illinois, there's a small grocery that two brothers that cut meat, and that's really probably 75% of their sales. There's a line going back down the aisle for stuff when you get to the holidays or you get to the 4th of July. So that skill might be one that we look at teaching, because it's a little different than working in a meat packing plant and being able to be a meat cutter, how to be a butcher, a skilled butcher. So, but that's one of the things that is a destination draw. So if we can do that at any of these projects, I try to help draw that in. Unfortunately, because there are so many stores closing, you're able to draw from a little bit farther away because that food desert bubble keeps getting bigger. So Cairo is a good example. No one ever thinks of going into Cairo, Illinois for anything, but two grocery stores just north of that, small independents, are closing as well. So now that's going to leave an even bigger group that has to drive down towards Cairo and then hit the bridge and go over to a different state. Well, if we just had something there for them, they might be coming into town to shop again, which hasn't happened in probably 20, 30 years. So
That's great. Thank you, Sean. I'm cognizant of the time. It's 2 minutes before 1 o'clock. I'm just going to say thanks, Sean, for speaking today, and thanks to University of Illinois Extension for hosting Sean and this topic. It's really great to see a nice crowd, and thanks again. Hand it back to you, Nancy.